think I'm in the right place, Wes. This is the Juice on the Cuse podcast, right? I think I remember the right way to get here. It has been quite a while. Wes Cheng, Matt Dagostino here with you on the Juice on the Cuse podcast. Wes Cheng been holding it down while I've been living under a rock, known as the NBA playoffs. But we're back, Wesley, reunited, and it feels so good.
It's great to have you back, Matt. I missed you. The show's not the same without you. It's certainly good to have you back in the saddle. So welcome back.
I believe your sincerity 37% of the way, like that. So catch me up here, and some of our listeners as well, as we get back into recruiting season for football. Season's just around the corner as it is, and if there are other people that have been living under a rock like I have been, catch me up on what's going on with Fran Brown's recruits. We've got a couple of guys that have recently committed to Syracuse in the last week or so. Let's start with the most recent one, and this is surprising when you get a note on this. A long snapper, Wes, Henry Searcy from Tallahassee.
Yeah, so Matt, that's the latest commitment for Syracuse, as you said, on Tuesday. And it's obviously not the sexiest position per se as a long snapper, but as our friend punter Brandon Carney likes to say on this very podcast, special teams is 1/3 of the game. And this is not just any long snapper. Searcy is considered one of the best long snappers in the 2025 class, and he picked Syracuse over an offer from Memphis. He was on Syracuse's campus in June. He competed in specialist camp, and that's where he earned his offer. He tells me the reason why he picked Syracuse was because of his relationship with special teams coordinator James Valono, and really the opportunity to play, we have to call it this now. It used to be Power 6 when we were in college. It was Power 5 recently. Now it's Power 4 football. So again, not the flashiest ad, but I think certainly definitely a very important one.
It's funny that you say, one of the top long snappers in the country, and his offers were Syracuse and Memphis. I assume that's just more of a position teams and coaches feel like they can develop from other recruits along the way. But it's definitely eye-catching when you see in the headline, long snapper recruit. It just doesn't sound like somebody that comes along all that often. We've got Gabe Daniels from Atlanta, a wide receiver, also committing last week to the Orange West.
Yeah, so Matt, here's a commitment from your neck of the woods. So he's a 3-star rated prospect. He plays at Greater Atlanta Christian in Georgia. And this is a guy who's one of the fastest players in the class. He clocks a 10.5 in the 100 meters. And I know that you can run 10.5, but maybe in the 200 meters. I'm sorry, the 50 meters, excuse
1
me.
meter. So yeah. Thanks. I appreciate that.
Maybe in the 50 meters, Matt.
Been upgraded.
And real dogfight in his recruitment in the end between Kansas and Syracuse, with NC State as the third finalist. No one really knew which way he was leaning only a few days before his commitment ceremony. I really like the athleticism here a lot, Matt. This is someone who's recruited by Fran Brown when Brown was at Georgia. This is a really impressive ad for the Orange, one, again, that really went down to the wire. And, again, I spoke to him. He said that it was the relationship with Fran Brown, and he had this message to deliver to Orange fans, which is, I'm locked in, get ready, I'm all set to go. So that's, again, another very impressive ad for the Orange.
That feels much like what we were talking about kind of in the winter and even into the springtime. That same kind of feel about Fran Brown's ability to recruit nationwide and his ties to the Southeast when he was with Georgia, but bringing them up to the Northeast. And that same kind of mentality that Fran Brown seems to give. We're talking athletes here. One from the great above in Canada, Nathan Nyandoro, listed as an athlete, also announced his commitment to Syracuse back on June 28th.
Yeah, so Matt, I like this commitment a lot. And Nathan is, as you said, out of Canada. We all know how Syracuse did with Matt Bergeron a couple of years ago, who now plays professional football. And again, your neck of the woods, speaking of the Atlantic connections. And I think because Canada is so under-recruited, Syracuse has developed a nice pipeline there. And this is someone who has very good measurables. And if he grew up in, say, California or Florida, or again in Georgia, I think this would be a very different kind of recruitment. So he comes in and hasn't played against the best competition. So he is very raw, but I like his potential as someone that Syracuse can really coach up over time. And I think in that third or fourth year, he's going to be a real contributor to this team.
And we've seen the Syracuse basketball program able to recruit in Canada and bring in some Canadian guys and have good success with them. So it's interesting to see it on the football side of things now as well. Some guys that will be soon announcing their plans of where they plan to attend to go to college. We start off with a 4-star defensive back, Wes. Syracuse listed as a finalist for all these guys. Dwayne Galloway, looking to see where he ends up. You think at this point it may not be Syracuse, however?
Yeah, Matt, Galloway did take an official visit to Syracuse back in June, but he also visited West Virginia, Purdue, and Kentucky as well. And I think Kentucky being his last official visit prior to the July dead period that we're in right now, they have all the momentum here. Again, 4-star recruit out of Ohio. I think he ends up down south to play for the Wildcats.
He is scheduled to announce on the 5th of this week. This is July 3rd, by the way. We didn't set that up at the top, West, but we are right before the celebration of our country's existence. 7/5, also the date scheduled for Elijah Crawford to make his announcement of where he'll attend college, a 3-star defensive tackle, Wes.
So Syracuse isn't going to walk out of this month without adding another member to the class. Matt, there's a lot of buzz around Crawford and Syracuse. This is someone that Syracuse has targeted for a long time, coming out of Maryland. Rutgers and West Virginia are his other suitors. I like Syracuse a lot here, and after speaking with a few sources, I have Crawford heading to the Orange.
And then lastly, on the 10th, Isaiah Mizell, a 3-star wideout. A few colleges in his final list: Kansas State, Arizona, Georgia Tech, and Syracuse. But you feel like Syracuse may be on the outside looking into this one as well?
Yeah, Matt, this is probably one that Syracuse doesn't end out on top for. I know that Mizell did take an official visit to Syracuse, but a source is telling me that Syracuse really not in the mix here. I think he either stays in the Southeast at Georgia Tech, again, your neck of the woods, Matt. We seem to be talking a lot about Georgia today, or he heads out west to Arizona, but he's definitely not heading north to Syracuse. I think the official visit went well, but on the other hand, now that Gabe Daniels, another speedy wide receiver, is in the fold, I don't think Syracuse is really recruiting Mizell that well.
So take me big picture on this, Wes, as we look at the football team moving forward here as we're in July already. Second most number of recruits in the 2025 recruiting class, going beyond this season and looking to next season already, trailing just Rutgers. So my first question is there anybody playing high school football in the state of New Jersey that is left between Fran Brown recruiting with Syracuse and Rutgers getting them to Piscataway?
Yeah, there's I think I don't know about necessarily New Jersey about filling the class, but I think there are a couple spots left in this class. There's still a couple more players that Syracuse is still pursuing. There's a commitment from Rich Beeline. We didn't mention this, but he's a New York quarterback out of Cardinal Hayes in the Bronx. That is a pipeline that Syracuse absolutely wants to establish. And his twin brother, Blake Beeline, is considering Syracuse and Virginia. So that's a scholarship that they have open. I think they may try to go special teams, maybe add a top kicker because they did, offer some 2025 kickers. Outside of that, I don't know how many spots there are left in the class. Maybe they try to go defensive back. Maybe they try to add, another guy in the trenches, whether that's on the offensive, defensive line. But that's pretty much it. The class, as you said, is pretty full. Second largest class so far in the 2025 class. I think this class ends up in the upper 30s, low 40s, according to Rivals, when all is said and done. And that's going to be the top program or top class ever that Syracuse has recruited if everything holds true.
So as we get into summer workouts and then eventually practices before the season kicks off later on in the year, where do we see Fran Brown's vision and its progress to this point? I know they've lost a recruit or two that they thought they had and ended up going somewhere else, but we see the guys that are still committing for this year, for next year, and certainly more guys on the radar. Where do you think we are in terms of, I know the excitement level when Fran Brown was announced as the coach and the first month or two into his tenure as he tried to set up some footprints. Where do you think we are in that progression, and has any of that excitement around the program tapered off at all as we move into July and August now?
I've had this conversation with Brad a couple times, and no, I don't think the excitement has faded at all. I think people are really looking forward to seeing the results on the field. There are a lot of, top transfers that are coming in, headlined by Kyle McCord. I think there's a lot of things that we need to see on the field. So, of course, the recruiting is done well in the 2024 and 2025 class. They're still starting to build their 2026. And I think some of those recruits are going to be looking at the product on the field. If they go, 4-8, that's not going to be a great finish for Syracuse in terms of their 2026 class. On the other hand, if they win 8-9 games, which I think the schedule is set up for because they avoid Clemson and FSU in the schedule, this is something that, Fran Brown can really build off of. So I think there's a lot of excitement in the fall. I think it just really depends on how everything gels together in this class and this team that they have so far.
It feels like we're at the point of the year where it's just like, all right, let's get these guys on the field. We've heard so much about them and heard so much about what this coaching staff wants to do. Let's see it with our eyes finally. I think that excitement will kind of re-energize some of the fans that feel like we may be in kind of a little bit of a lull period as we work into the summer. So we've tackled the football squad. The NBA season, the professional basketball world never stops anymore. That is a 365-day endeavor. We'll talk about last week's NBA draft, what did or did not happen for Syracuse folks, and where some of those former Syracuse basketball players will be playing in the Summer League. We'll catch up on all of that coming up on the Juice on the Cuse podcast. BetOnline is your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season. From baseball, golf, soccer, right to all the top fights in UFC and MMA and boxing. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. Bet online. The game starts here. Welcome back to the Juice on the Cuse podcast. Matt Dagostino alongside Wes Cheng. And we shift over to the basketball end of things here, Wes, as it pertains to Syracuse. Last week's NBA draft came and went. Judah Mintz not named as a draft pick for any team in the 58 picks over the course of 2 rounds. But it was actually just announced today, July the 3rd, Judah Mintz going to suit up for the Philadelphia 76ers Summer League team when it takes the court here in another week or two. Good to see him land on a roster. It's been a team that's been in the news, West, signing Paul George to a big deal to go along with Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, a new recipient of a max contract from the 76ers. So Philly looking to keep up with the Celtics and the Knicks of the world in the Eastern Conference. Judah Mintz, a chance to make that roster come the fall now.
So I was a little surprised that Mintz, we had talked about this earlier in the year, Matt, that I thought Mintz may not be coming back to Syracuse because I think he had kind of hit his ceiling there, but he would maybe transfer, put his name in the portal, and then end up on a different team because this is the era of NIL. And he gets a Summer League contract. That's great. That maybe pays, I don't know, $10,000. And that's certainly nice for a couple weeks of work. But in the NIL era, he can actually command a couple $100,000. So even if he wasn't interested in Syracuse, he could have entered the portal. I'm sure he would have made a lot of money elsewhere. I'm not sure how this plays out for him now because I don't think he's making the Philadelphia 76ers roster, especially because they are going for it now. They're not like a Detroit where they're in development mode. So we'll see where he ends up. Even if it's the G League, which I think is a great league, and I think he can work his way onto an NBA roster eventually. Again, I don't know how you feel about this, but to me, with NIL out there, it would almost be better to return to college, especially in terms of a financial standpoint.
It's interesting to see from a Philadelphia roster perspective. Their point guard towards the end of last year was Kyle Lowry, and really kind of de facto Tyrese Maxey at times where he was facilitating the offense. I'm curious to see how well Judah's defense plays up in Summer League. Obviously, he was a guy who would grab a couple of steals per game, was never shy on that end of things. I wonder if he can kind of make his mark with that and maybe some playmaking. We know the speed is there for the NBA game. We know he can score, but I think he may be able to hang his hat on defense if he's going to be able to make a roster anywhere in the NBA. It may be the defensive side of things. Everybody is looking for guys who can lock up on the perimeter with everybody playing outside these days. So I'm not convinced that he'll be on a roster come October, but I am excited to see what he can do in the Vegas Summer League as a member of the Philadelphia 76ers. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. You mentioned Detroit was the former home of Buddy Boeheim. And now Buddy Boeheim going to one of the it teams in the NBA, signing an Exhibit 10 deal with the Oklahoma City Thunder. A lot of young talent on that team. They have aspirations to go beyond the second round where they were last year. And this is one of those teams, again, if you can find a way to shoot, they have other shooters on that team, but they have a lot of good cohesion within that roster, Wes, to where a lot of guys have an expertise, let's call it. Isaiah Joe's a great shooter for them. Shea is their number one scorer, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. Logic tells you if he couldn't get on the floor for the Detroit Pistons, who are rebuilding one of the worst teams in the league, he's probably not going to make the roster out of the gates for one of the best teams in the league, but it's certainly a fun organization to be a part of. The Thunder certainly know what they're doing.
So, Matt, shame on me. I had to look up what an Exhibit 10 contract was. And for those of you listening who don't know, it's you don't count toward the salary cap unless you make the NBA team or unless you sign a two-way contract. Otherwise, you can get assigned to the G League team, and it doesn't take a hit to your roster. So yeah, Matt, I don't really have anything to add to that. It's a great up and coming team. Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, one of the best talents in the NBA right now, and I think one of the best kept secrets, even though Oklahoma City had a very good playoff run. But I do think that it's going to be difficult for him to make that roster. Maybe he can latch on with a two-way contract. And again, to your point, he couldn't see the floor in Detroit. And, that's a place that's, Oklahoma City that's going to pile up a lot of wins in the near future. So I'm not sure if there's a path forward for Buddy Boeheim on this team. But, I certainly wish him the best. I hope everything goes well, on that team. And maybe he can, again, latch on with a two-way contract.
Yeah, I think that's the trend here for recent memory for Syracuse basketball players. Just hoping to latch onto a team. We've seen what it can do for O'Shea Brissett now as a ring to his credit. Just being able to have the persistence to stay relevant, stay on a roster somewhere. I think that's what a lot of these guys are looking for. And two guys who were former Orange players, but were still in college last year, Jesse Edwards. Went to West Virginia last season, signed a two-way deal with the Minnesota Timberwolves. This one seems like a tall task, no pun intended, but when you've got Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns as the two twin towers for Minnesota, find it difficult to see where Jesse Edwards fits in there to be able to see much floor time for Minnesota, if at all.
Yeah, and I know you're a huge fan of Anthony Edwards, Matt, and it's hard not to be after that playoff run, defeating defending champion Denver. And, I'm happy for Edwards. You mentioned there's not necessarily a path to playing time, but he was a really littly known prospect out of the Netherlands when he came over to Syracuse. So kudos to the Syracuse coaching staff at the time for identifying him and doing the lion's share of the talent development to turn him into an NBA prospect. Now, again, is he going to be a big contributor in that team? Probably not. But those two-way contracts, you get a little bit of NBA experience in some blowout games. You get to develop in the G League. You're kind of a stash in some ways. And I think Edwards has the ability to develop into a solid NBA player. I haven't really seen his perimeter game too much, but I think, if we were talking about like the 90s, he would be a perfect back to the basket kind of guy that could contribute. Again, I'm not sure if he really sticks long-term in the NBA, but the fact that he's involved in the conversation is pretty impressive.
Yeah, if he can rim run, play a little defense, and rebound, there's use for those guys who would have been, buried on the bench a couple of years ago. They're finding ways to get there and contribute. Isaiah Hartenstein, a great example.
Speaking of OKC,
he goes from bench player for the Clippers to bench player / meaningful role player for the Knicks this season, and then just signs for 3 years and $87 million with the Thunder earlier this week. Last guy on the Syracuse radar for Summer League teams in the NBA, Joe Girard, going to be part of the Raptors Summer League roster. Again, a guy, Girard's got to be a lights out shooter at this point with his size and his skill set to be able to have any impact on an NBA roster, but we'll at least get to see some Syracuse Orange representation here in Vegas coming up.
Yeah, I'm happy for Girard. As much as it pained me to see him beat Syracuse twice in a Clemson uniform, I thought he had a great season showing what he can do as a pure shooting guard. Happy that he gets the shot to impress an NBA team this summer. Again, I think because of his size or lack thereof and his athleticism or lack thereof, playing defense is really the name of the game on the perimeter if you're going to make it as an NBA shooting guard. And he doesn't really have the size to kind of get his own shot. So, he's more of just a spot up shooter, at least at the NBA level. So again, do I think he's going to make that team? No, but is he in the conversation? And could he be, kind of a G League guy and, probably an overseas player? Yes. And again, I don't think there should be no animosity toward Girard because he did everything he could for 4 years in an orange uniform. So I again wish him nothing but the best of luck this summer.
And Wes, it's never too early to look ahead. ESPN 2025 mock draft, smack dab in the middle of the first round. Syracuse incoming freshman Donnie Freeman projected to go to the Indiana Pacers. Obviously, a lot to happen between now and then, but good to see some love for Syracuse players in the first round, possibly once again in the NBA draft. I did want to touch on this, Wes, because I haven't really had a chance to discuss it with you, but Syracuse naming what really amounts to a general manager for its basketball program, something we've seen some other schools do, notably Duke has done the same thing. Tell me what impact you think this could have on the program as a whole, and explain to those who maybe haven't heard all that much about it what exactly that role will be come the fall semester for Syracuse basketball.
So for those of you who haven't heard of Alex Klein in the basketball recruiting world, he ran the Recruit Scoop, which was also a Rivals.com page for a little while, and we were obviously with Rivals, so a little shout out there that we were able to identify him as a great source for recruiting. And he was a scout for the Knicks for the last 4 years. I think this is the era, again, we're in the era of NIL. I think there is going to be some sort of, I think down the line, some sort of salary cap. So you get him for the talent evaluation, of course, because he's done a great job with that of both the professional and high school ranks. And I think he's going to be someone that can maybe help, figure out how to spend that money, having worked in an NBA front office. And maybe this player is worth this amount of money and how to kind of shoehorn that into, again, what I think will eventually be a salary cap. Alex is a huge name in the basketball world. I think this is a great move to get him where he is in his career as he builds his credentials. And I think he'll probably head back to an NBA front office eventually, maybe more in like that assistant general manager and eventually general manager role. But to get him this early, he's a young guy. He's going to make a great impact at Syracuse. I think it's a great move. I think, again, we are in the era where we are paying college athletes, and there's nothing wrong with that. I've always supported that. And this is going to be another step in helping to facilitate it.
It's wild to see where this ends up going just in a few short years, where we're looking at it where college and university general managers are basically a prevalent and recognized thing at this point in college sports. It's amazing to see, and we'll see where it ends up. But I've always said I would love to one day be the GM of one of my favorite teams, and Klein, a Syracuse grad, basically getting to do that at his alma mater. So a pretty cool situation. And we'll see, but that's the way things are going in college sports. It's crazy to see, but Wes, you would be the number one draft pick if I were the GM of Syracuse podcasts on the Rivals website. So
are you thinking about tanking your program? Is that why?
I think you're helping the tanking ratings, by having me on as well. So I think you're balancing that out. So we appreciate that. I tend to do a pretty good job of tanking on my own. So number one pick, Wes Cheng. Let's just remember that once again. He's the stalwart here of the Juice on the Cuse podcast. We'll be back down the road. We'll have more to discuss as always as we get that much closer to pigskin season, and more updates of what Fran Brown's got cooking for the Syracuse football team. For Wes, I'm Matt. We appreciate you tuning in here to the Juice on the Cuse podcast.